Hello fiber friends and family, my name is Boria, also known as Brooklyn Boy Knits, and I am super excited to have you join me today for my very first knit along. This is the Massallo Shawl knit along, and I am so excited to be doing this. But before I get into the knit along, I just want to take this opportunity to thank you all for all your wonderful prayers and thoughts, all the love you've been sending me these past few weeks. I'm not sure if you know, but I had been battling the coronavirus for several weeks. It was a very, very difficult time for me. It was a dark time for me. It made me just really appreciate life a little bit more. But I am back. I am healthy. I am at 100%, as they say. So I'm super excited to be back, and just wanted to thank you all for all those prayers, those thoughts, and keeping me at heart. It really got me through a really difficult time. So thank you. With that said, I am super excited about this knit along. Let's talk a little bit about the pattern just for a second. Now in the pattern, you'll notice that I use half skeins for the shawl. However, we're going to be making this a little bit bigger. Which is why most shops have been selling kits in full skeins, right? Full skeins of DK weight. We're going to be using a size 7 needle, circular needle, 24 inches preferably. So I'm super excited. Now, today's April 25th, right? So this is the first video that I will be releasing here on YouTube. 2 days later, which will be April 27th, I will be going live on Instagram to answer any questions you may have regarding the knit along. If you get stuck, if you have a question, a suggestion, anything, that'll be your opportunity to go ahead and ask me those questions on on Instagram on April 27th. Again, today's April 25th, and on April 27th, I will be going live at 7:30. To answer any of your questions, just to hang out. It'll be like a virtual, pretty much a virtual knit along, right? So I'm really excited about that. In the next clip, I will be introducing all the yarn that I am using. Special thank you to the Jimmy Bean Wool family and Madeline Tosh. I will be using, for this particular sample for this knit along, I am using the Madeline Tosh DK weight yarn. I have 6 colors that I picked out. I'm super excited to show you those colors. I think you guys are going to be really surprised. And I know that Jimmy Bean Wool is selling kits, so if you haven't jumped on yet, don't worry. These videos will be on YouTube indefinitely, so that you can continue with the knit along after the release dates. So Jimmy Bean Wool is selling kits, and I know that they have a wonderful selection. I picked out a couple series of colors for you guys, so I hope you enjoy that. So with that said, sit back, relax, get your needles out, get your yarn ready, and let's begin the Massallo Shawl knit along. Alright, so now that we are ready to begin, the first thing I want to do is go ahead and introduce the yarn that I'm going to be using for my particular Massallo Shawl sample. Thank you to Madeline Tosh Yarns and the Jimmy Bean Wool family for supplying me with the yarn support for this particular knit along. I know that Madeline Tosh and Jimmy Bean Wool have put together some awesome kits. If you guys are interested in purchasing kits for this Massallo Shawl knit along, they do have kits available on their website, so head on over there and take a look at the selection. I know that I hand selected 2 of the kits myself, so I'm really excited about that. And I'm even more excited to show you the colors that I chose for my particular sample. So again, we are using Tosh DK from Madeline Tosh. It's 225 yards of superwash merino wool. And the first color that I'm going to be using is Arctic by Madeline Tosh. That's my first color. That's going to be A. Yarn B is going to be Stormborn. They're pretty. Oh, got the little speckles in there. The third color we're going to be using is called Rye Bourbon. Pretty golden color there. The fourth color I'm going to be using is called Tiny House. All right, and the fifth yarn we're going to be using is called Phantasm. Nice deep burgundy there. And finally, the sixth color I'm going to be using is called Peppercorn. Got those tones of burgundy in there. So I want to talk a little bit about why I chose these colors. And you're going to notice that I have 3 darks and 3 lights. Now, for this particular pattern, your stitches will be noticed more when you're using a dark with a lighter color, as opposed to 2 darks. With this particular shawl, you'll notice that the stitches are 3-dimensional. We're using a lot of slip stitches, knit one, purl ones on one side, and then the other side is going to be the slip stitch, right? So I prefer using a dark with a light versus 2 darks because you're not going to get the same result. There's no rule, however. You don't have to necessarily stick to my rule in terms of combining a dark with a light. Eventually your stitches will pop, even if you're using 2 dark colors. So let's talk a little bit about the sequence. Now I have 6 different colors. A lot of people have been asking, well, Lewis, can I use 4? Can I use 5 colors? Absolutely. We are going to steer off course a little bit on this particular knit along. The pattern does require 6 sections. We will be increasing those sections, meaning we're going to have more repeats. It's honestly, guys, I designed this shawl for all levels, including beginners. This is the perfect beginner shawl design if you want to learn more about stitch definition, if you want to learn about slip stitches. This is the perfect opportunity for you to go ahead and dive into that. With that said, we're going to be using full skeins. Now in my pattern, you will notice that I have half skeins, which is 150 yards of DK weight. These bad boys are 225 yards. So we got a lot of yarn, right? And the idea is that we use up much yarn as we can for this particular shawl. I want you guys to go really big with the shawl. My sample is going to be the standard. The sample that I will be showing you in a minute is going to be the standard size. However, we're going to be making big shawls. I want big shawls. I want to see a lot of color. Some of you have been sending me photos of the yarn that you selected, and I cannot wait to see these shawls. So we're going to start with A and B, okay? And the way this works, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about the sequences. We pick up A and B, and that's going to be our first section. I will be dropping A and picking up C for my second section, right? So this is going to be what my second section will look like. I'm going to drop B and pick up D for the next section. I drop C, I pick up E, and that'll be my next section. I drop that yarn, and I'm going to eventually pick up the final yarn, which will be this color. Now, that's section 5. This will be section 5. I drop this yarn, and I go back to A, and I'm going to finish with A. Now, that's going to be your 6 sections. Again, we're going to go big on each section. So each section is going to be wider. I'm going to show you the shawl in just a moment. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to cake this up, and I will be right back so that we can get started on casting on, and I can show you more of the shawl. Okay, so now that I have all my yarn caked up and we're ready to begin. The first thing that I want to do is I want to show you the first sample that I ever made for this Massallo Shawl. Now for this particular sample I used marinated yarns, and again, we're using DK weight, but again, if you feel like you want to go ahead and you want to work with fingering weight or even Aran or worsted weight, by all means go ahead. Just make sure to size up your needles, right, based on the weight that you're using for your yarn. I prefer using the DK weight just because it gives it a nice weight to the shawl. Again, so for this particular sample that I made using marinated yarns, I wanted to show you the stitches that we're using here for the shawl. So this is a basic slip stitch that we're using called Salt and Pepper Tweed, and then the reverse side, if you look at it, almost resembles a ribbing, and it is a ribbing because it is a knit one purl one side, but it doesn't look like it. I mean, you're getting a really cool fabric side to this where the stitches really are popping in and out of each other. All right, what I love so much about working with slip stitches is that the stitches tend to be three-dimensional, and again, there's so many different types of slip stitches out there, but for this one I'm doing a very basic slip stitch that's called Salt and Pepper Tweed. Okay, so now I wanted to talk a little bit about the shawl and why I chose in this particular sample the colors that I did, because I did a blend of darks with lights. It is an asymmetrical shawl, just so that you know, so it's not a perfect triangle where one side is just going to be longer than the other. I like it because it gives it a really cool drape. I'm a fan of asymmetrical shawls. As you know, if you've knitted my Culebra shawl, again, that was also asymmetrical. Now, so for section 1, which is going to always be your smallest section, which is here the blue and the red, A was my blue and B was my red, and I'm just going to explain the sequence that I used for this particular shawl. So A was blue, B was my red, I dropped the A, I pick up the gold. Now notice how I carried the red. Okay, we're going to be doing that throughout the shawl for each section as we're dropping colors. So here I carried the red in section 1 into section 2, but drop that blue, and then in section 3 I carried over the yellow. Section 4 I carried over the green. Section 5 I carried over the orange. But in section 6, what I did here was I repeated section 1, which was the smallest section. Okay, and I did that because I wanted it to sort of be a little organized. I love symmetry. I love when things really come together, and I wanted the beginning and I wanted the ending of my shawl to look very similar to each other. Now, in terms of your sequence and your order and how you pick and choose your colors, that's totally up to you. There are no rules as to how to go about that. Like I said, I prefer using a dark with a light color versus two darks, only because your stitches are really going to pop more when you're using a light and a dark color together, as opposed to two darks. For instance, you know, you got more, you can't really see the stitch definition as much here as you can here, where the gold and the green pop. Here in the green and the orange, because they're a little bit darker, you're not going to notice those stitches as much as you do in the section before. But again, there's no rule to how you pick your colors. Okay, now for those of you that had been messaging me saying, Lewis, can I use maybe 4 colors, 5 colors? In this particular sample, I used 4 colors, or I'm using 4 colors. Okay, now what I did differently here was that I decided I'm gonna have one main color going throughout each section. Okay, and for that color I chose a tan. I'm trying to do somewhat of a fade here with the greens, so because I'm only using 4 colors, I will be repeating these sections twice. Okay, so we got the dark green, the medium tone green, and then we have the lighter green, and then I'm going to go back to this green and so on. Okay, ending with this section. So again, because we are using full size skeins, okay, the idea is that we try to use as much yarn as possible. Okay, so now that we're ready to begin and start our setup section, I first want to talk about the needles that we're going to be using. So we're going to be using US size 7 needle, 36 inches. Now, because we are going to be making these shawls much bigger, eventually you're going to switch to a 36 inch US size 7 needle. Okay, so I just want to make that note now, that as the shawl does get bigger, you're going to want to switch your cord so that it's 36 inches. Okay, so we're going to start with yarn A, and on the setup rounds, setup rows, we are going to cast on 5 stitches with A, and of course I always like to use the long tail cast on method. I'm going to go ahead and cast on 5 stitches. Okay. Then I'm going to go ahead and grab yarn B, and I'm going to attach yarn B to yarn A now. And how I like to do that is just start off with a slip knot. I like to open up that loop and feed my cake right through that loop. And then I'm going to go ahead and tighten up that loop. Draw it all the way to the top of my needle. Now, usually people just go ahead and pick up that yarn and start knitting with it or start working with it. That's totally up to you. However, because in the second row we're going to be starting off just knitting right into it, I like to have a clean finish, and I find that by adding my yarn with a slip knot and just joining it that way, it tends to be a little bit cleaner. Sometimes people get that little loose bump there, and it tends to get a little bit sloppy sometimes. So I found a little technique that works for me, and I always join my yarn just by creating a slip knot and then just feeding the skein right into it. So I'm gonna go ahead and start row 1. And so with B, which is the white colored yarn, the lighter colored yarn, we're gonna go ahead and knit 1, purl 1. And then we're going to slip the next stitch purlwise. Now, I'm going to stop here for a second. I want to talk about that. Anytime we're working on a slip stitch row, you're always going to have your yarn in front of you and slip that next stitch purlwise. Okay? Let me show that again. Yarn is in front. You're going to take that next stitch purlwise and slip it. Okay? Next stitch, you're going to purl 1, followed by a yarn over, and then knit front and back of that last stitch. Now that first yarn over that we did, that's going to be 1 increase, and then the knit front and back is going to give you a 2nd increase. So we're doing 2 stitches, 2 stitch increase on each odd row. So I want you guys to make a note of that. And as you go along in the pattern and you're knitting up the shawl, you'll notice that it's very simple. It's just a 2-row repeat, and every odd row is always going to be that 2 stitch increase. Okay, so now for row 2, we're going to go ahead with yarn B. We're going to continue with yarn B, and we're going to start off with a yarn over. Okay. Now, I know it sounds a little odd, but and people say, well, you know, I've never started with a yarn over, and you don't see that quite often. But because we are working in asymmetrical shawls, with asymmetrical shawls, for most patterns, they do start off with yarn overs. And so that's what we're going to be doing here. We're starting off with the yarn over. The next 2 stitches we're going to knit. So we're going to knit 2 stitches. And then followed by knitting in the back of the next stitch. Knit 1 through the back loop. Okay. Then we're going to knit 1. Purl 1, and then knit 2 together. We're going to knit those last 2 stitches together. Okay. So that's the second row. Now we're going to go ahead on row 3, and we're going to pick up yarn A. Now, what I like to do is, whenever you're switching colors and you're going back and forth on your colors, always make sure that you cross your yarn in the same direction. Okay, so here's my A, and when I say cross my yarn, I'm going to cross over it, and because we're starting with a knit stitch always on every beginning odd row, I'm going to make sure that I cross my blue over the white. Okay, so make sure that you're always going in the same direction so that you can have a nice clean edge, and it'll give you that braid effect. So because we're going back and forth and we're using 2 different colors every time, you want to make sure that you're consistent in your work. So always cross over your yarn in the same direction. So we're going to go ahead, pick up yarn A. We're going to knit that first stitch. And we're going to start with a slip 1 purlwise. Remember to bring your yarn to the front, slip that stitch purlwise. We're going to purl 1, slip 1 stitch purlwise, purl the next stitch, slip the next stitch purlwise. We're going to yarn over, and then we're going to knit in the front and back of that last stitch. Now at this point you should have 9 stitches. So we got 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 stitches. You should have 9 stitches at the end of row 3. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and start working on row 4. And continuing with yarn A. Sorry guys, I keep mixing up my rows and my yarns and my colors. So with yarn A, we're gonna go ahead. Remember to yarn over. We're gonna start off with that yarn over. So let me do that again. Yarn over. We're gonna knit 2 stitches. So that's 1, 2, and then we're going to knit 1 through the back loop of the next stitch. Now I want you to take note here. Always make sure it's the same color. So you see that white, sometimes this yarn over will slip right behind that yarn, the white yarn. You want to make sure that that's in front, okay, because your first 4 stitches on every even row are going to be the same color. Okay, so that'll be a little that's something to just remember. The first 4 stitches will always be the same color. Okay, so we're gonna knit 1 through the back loop of that next stitch. I'm gonna pause again. 1, 2, 3, 4. We got our 4 stitches the same color. You'll know that you're going in the right direction. Okay, so just make sure that you're counting 4 of the same color stitches on every even row. Okay, then we are going to go ahead and we're going to purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, and now we have the last 2 stitches, which we're going to go ahead and knit those 2 together. And that takes care of our setup rows. Okay, so now we're ready to begin with section 1. Section 1, we pick up B, which is the light colored one. And remember, now I'm going to go ahead and I'm crossing over, but I'm bringing my B over in front of that blue. Okay, we're on an odd number row right now, so we're now on row 1 of section 1, and we always start that first stitch with a knit stitch. So we're going to knit that first stitch, we're going to purl 1, and then we're going to slip 1 purlwise. We're going to do that to the last stitch, ending in a purl stitch. So we slip that stitch, we're going to go ahead and purl the next stitch, slip the next stitch purlwise with the yarn in front, we're going to purl the next stitch, slip 1 purlwise with the yarn in front, purl 1, and we're going to yarn over, and then we're going to knit in the front and back of that last stitch. Row 2 of section 1, continuing with B, we're going to yarn over, we're going to knit those first 2 stitches, and now I want you to notice, you see that that's your yarn over from the previous row, and that's the one that we want to make sure that we're knitting through the back loop of that next stitch. So we're going to knit 1 through the back loop of that stitch. Now we're going to knit 1 purl 1 to the last 2 stitches. So we're going to knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1 to the last 2 stitches. We're going to knit those last 2 stitches together. Okay. Again, now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pick up yarn A, and this is where I cross over the white in front. And with A, I'm going to knit 1, bring the yarn to the front, because we're going to go ahead and we're going to slip 1 purlwise. We're going to purl the next stitch, slip the next stitch purlwise with the yarn in front, purl the next stitch, slip 1, purl 1, slip 1, purl 1, slip 1 to the last stitch. Okay, this is where we're going to go ahead and we're going to yarn over, and then we're going to knit in front and back of that last stitch. Now you can start seeing the formation of your pattern a little bit. All right, let's go on to row 4 of section 1. Remember, we're starting with the yarn over at the beginning of that round. This is an even row number, so we're going to start off with the yarn over. We're going to knit the next 2 stitches, 1, 2. Now here's what I was talking about. You see, sometimes that stitch will fall behind. We want to make sure that yarn over stitch that we did the previous row is in the front, okay? And we're going to go ahead and we're going to knit behind the back of that loop. The back of that stitch. And we're going to purl one, knit one to the last 2 stitches. Purl one. We're going to knit one. So basically I'm purling all the white stitches and knitting all the blue stitches. And we're going to do that to the last 2 stitches. We're down to our last 2 stitches. We're going to knit those 2 together. All right, so we only have 2 more rows to go in section 1, which is row 5. Now again, so I'm going to make sure that I cross over my white yarn over the blue yarn, okay? Remember, I'm starting off with a knit stitch always on the odd rows once I've switched colors. And we're going to knit one, and that's the first stitch, and then we're going to purl one. Slip one purlwise. Remember to have your yarn in front of you. And we're going to do that to the last stitch. Okay, so now I'm at my last stitch, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to yarn over, and then I'm going to knit front and back of that last stitch. Okay, now we're down to the last row, row 6 of section 1. Remember, we're starting with a yarn over at the beginning of that row, and I'm going to knit 2 stitches. 1, 2, and then I'm going to knit one through the back loop of the next stitch, which is going to be the yarn over that we did in the previous row. And again, you'll see that those first 4 stitches are the same color as I mentioned before. That's how you know you're in the right direction. You're going in the right direction. Sorry. Okay. So we're going to knit one, purl one to the last 2 stitches. So this time we're knitting all the white stitches, purling all the blue stitches. Knit, purl. Knit, purl. And what I love about this is that it's great for beginners, especially because we're learning a little new technique here, such as yarn overs and knit front and back, and slip stitches. So those are the three things that for you beginners out there that are working on this knit along, those are 3 little techniques that you can take with you. And if it's for some reason, if you need more direction on these, you can just go ahead and you can, there's wonderful YouTube tutorials out there also, but hopefully you had to see this clear enough in the video. All right, so we are at the last 2 stitches, and remember, we're going to knit these last 2 stitches together. Okay, so let's pause there for a second and let's just examine what we got going on here. All right, so we just finished our setup rows and section 1. All right, And in section 1 there's six rows. Okay, now this is the slip stitch side, and this is going to be the knit one purl one side, as I like to call it. Okay, so you can start seeing the formation of your pattern. Now if you look at your pattern, right after your 6th row in section 1, it says repeat rows 3 to 6 8 more times. Now because we are going bigger, we're going to continue going way more times than that. So we're not going to do 8. Let's go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and say repeat rows 3 to 6 as much as you want. Now I know for many of you out there, what does that mean, Lewis? Well, it can mean as many times as you want, saying we can do this 15 more times, we can do this 20 more times. We have full skeins of yarn. Now if you feel like, you know what, I want to go ahead and I want to go as big as I can, by all means go ahead and do that. So we're going to continue working with section 1, and again, so we're going to be repeating rows 3 through 6. Again, I'm gonna go ahead and say, why not do 20 times, or maybe let's do 15 to 20 times. See how big that goes, at, you know, how big your shawl is at that point. If you feel like you want to go bigger, by all means go ahead. Again, we have full skeins of yarn, and I want to make sure that you guys are using as much of that yarn as possible. Okay, so I went ahead and I knitted up a couple rows just so that we could do a little quick recap before we end part 1 of the Massallo Shawl knit along. All right, so remember, odd rows are always going to be your slip stitch. It's going to be your slip stitch side, right? And then your even rows are always going to be your, what I like to call, the knit one purl one rows. And now I want you to take a look at the fabric. So this is the even side, right? Even row side. And it gives it a really cool star shape. I like to call it a star shape. And then you got your slip stitch side. But remember how I told you earlier that those stitches are going to be three-dimensional. They're going to really pop. And so here you can see that I have my light with my dark, like I mentioned before, and you can really see those stitches popping out. And I like to call this Roman numeral 4, or 5 I should say. It forms that little V and it looks like a Roman numeral 5, so I think it adds a pretty cool accent. And again, with these slip stitches, you're going to see your fabric really stand out, and also on the other side. So there is no wrong or right side when it comes to this shawl. I love both sides, and when you're draping it and wrapping it around your neck, it's going to look gorgeous. Okay, so I just want to do a really quick recap, and we're going to start with the odd row, which is going to be your slip stitch side. All right, so now that I'm ready to switch colors, so I ended up with the blue. Now I'm gonna I ended in blue, and I'm gonna go ahead and start with the white. Remember, I'm going to cross over in front of the blue, and when we start that slip stitch side with slip stitch row, which is going to be always going to be your odd row, we always start this first stitch with a knit stitch. Okay, now my next stitch here is going to be purl, so I'm going to purl that first stitch, and then I'm going to slip that next stitch purlwise. Remember having that yarn in the front of you. Purl the next stitch, slip that next stitch purlwise. Let's move this guy out the way. And you're going to do that all the way to the end of that row until the very last stitch. So we're going to purl that, and we're going to slip the next stitch purlwise. Purl the next stitch, slip this next stitch, purl one, slip one, purl one, slip one. Slip one, purl one. And so now I'm down to my last stitch right here. And remember, I'm going to always yarn over. There goes that first increase. Then I'm going to knit front and back of the next stitch, giving you that second increase stitch. All right, so we just increased 2 stitches on that odd row, which is going to be your slip stitch side. Okay, and now remember, now we're on our even side row, so we're always going to start with that yarn over. Okay, got my yarn over. I'm going to knit those first 2 stitches. Got 1, 2, and then I'm going to knit through the back of that next stitch, that loop of the back of the next stitch. There we go. So remember, we got those 4 stitches that are always gonna, they should always be the same color. So if you see that last stitch is a different color on your 4th stitch, then you did something wrong. Okay, and then I'm going to knit 1, purl 1 to the last 2 stitches. So I'm knitting the white stitches, I'm knitting the white, purling the blues. Knit, purl, again to your very last 2 stitches. Now I'm on my last purl stitch, and I'm left with the last 2 stitches, which I'm going to knit those 2 together. All right, so just keep in mind, I want you guys to continue knitting this, making this first section as big as you want. We can go off course here a little bit on the pattern, where if you want to make certain sections maybe a little bit thinner than the next, but I find that when you keep your sections even, it's going to give it a really nice clean look. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to end here for today, and I want you guys to continue knitting that first section. And I'm gonna have you guys pause if you feel like you want to go ahead and you want to move on to the next section, and then by all means go ahead. We will have our first Instagram live Q&A session on the 27th, which is going to be Monday, April 27th. I will be on at 7:30. So for anyone that wants to come on and has any questions or concerns, or just wants to talk about the Massallo Shawl, that's going to be your opportunity to go ahead and ask me any questions. In the meantime, I encourage you guys again to use as much of the yarn as you can. You don't have to use the entire skein, but we just want to make sure that we get our sections pretty big. I want these shawls to be draped. All right, so have fun, and I will see you guys on Monday.